Hey guys, I am going to go ahead and start our reading for chapter 10 of Messenger. So let's kind of review what happened in the last chapter, chapter 9. We know in chapter 9, it was pretty brief. It was a really quick chapter. Maddie was going into the trading area of the town to get some bread, and he ran into this woman, and he was worried. Or it was kind of a conversation that he was confused about, I think, because this woman had left her town and was new to village. She had left her young children behind, and she was worried that with this petition going around, um, that the teacher had kind of started and was pushing the petition to stop allowing people to come to village. So she was like, well, if I go back to get my kids, are they going to allow me back in? And Maddie was trying to comfort her, and he was like, well, you should be fine. But she talked about what a difficult time it was to come back. And then he met up with Jean at the market, and they were just kind of going on, also talking about her dad, the teacher, and they were like, yeah, remember how nice he used to be, and he used to read us poetry, and he used to have such a heart for all these artistic things, but now he's just not that guy, and he's become like kind of mean. So anyway, that is kind of where that chapter was, and then it ends with Maddie and Jean saying, what's going on here, and what's this future going to look like for us if all these things are changing, and they felt worried and kind of doomed is the word that they used. And then he remembered his power that he hasn't used in a while. The one that brought the puppy back to life, and then he remembered the frog in the field that very first time that he used his power. So that's where we left off. So let's see what happens next. Chapter 10 is about, let's see, about 8 pages. So it shouldn't be too long. And then remember that you can listen to this more than once throughout the week if you need to, so that you can prepare for the quiz on Friday. Okay? So, chapter 10. The meeting to discuss and vote on the petition began in the orderly, careful way such meetings had always been handled. Leader stood on a platform, read the petition in his strong, clear voice, and opened the meeting to debate. One by one, the people of village stood and gave their opinions. The new ones had come. Maddie could see the woman he had met on the path standing beside a tall, light-haired boy who must be Vladik. Remember, that's her son. The two were with a group of new ones who had a place apart since they could not vote. Now remember, the new people can't vote yet, and neither can Maddie, because Maddie does not have his given name yet. Small children, bored, playing along the edge of the pine grove. Maddie had once been like them when he was new here and hadn't liked meetings or debates, but now he stood with Seer and the other adults, and he paid attention. He had not even brought Frolic, who usually accompanied Maddie everywhere. Today the puppy was left at home, whimpering behind the closed door as they walked away. It was frighteningly obvious now, with the population gathered, that something terrible was happening. At Trade Mart it had been evening, dark, and Maddie had been so interested in the proceedings that he had not noticed many individuals, only those who went to the platform, like Mentor, and the woman who had been so oddly cruel to her husband as they started home. Now, though, it was bright daylight. Maddie was able to watch everyone, and to his horror he could see the changes. Near him stood his friend Raymond with his parents and younger sister. It was Raymond's mother who had asked to trade for a fur jacket and been denied. But they had had a gaming machine for quite a while, and so a trade had been made in the past. Maddie looked carefully at his friend's family. He had not seen Raymond since the day recently when he suggested a fishing expedition and been told that Raymond was not well. Raymond glanced at Maddie and smiled, but Maddie held his breath for a moment, dismayed to see that indeed his friend was ill. Raymond's face was no longer tan with rosy cheeks, but instead seemed thin and gray. Beside him, his little sister seemed sick too. Her eyes were sunken, and Mattie could hear her cough. Once, he knew, her mother would have leaned down to tend the little girl at the sound of such a cough. Now, while Mattie watched, the woman simply shook the child roughly by the shoulder and said, "Shh." One by one the people spoke, and one by one Mattie identified those who had traded. Some of those had been among the most industrious, the kindest, and the most steward citizens of village, now went to the platform and shouted out their wish that the border be closed, that we, Mattie shuddered at the use of we, would not have to share the resources anymore. So again, these people who were, upstanding members of the community are now shouting that they don't want anyone else in. It's very out of character for them because in this village, they accepted everyone. We need all the fish for ourselves. Our school is not big enough to teach their children to, only our own. They can't even speak right. We can't understand them. They have too many needs. We don't want to take care of them. And finally, we've done it long enough. So those are all the arguments these people have for not letting any more people in. Now and then a lone citizen, untouched by trade, would go to the platform and try to speak. They spoke of the history of village and how each of them had fled their poverty and cruelty and become welcomed in this new place that had taken them in. The blind man spoke eloquently of the day he had been brought here half dead and been tended for months by the people of village until, though he was still without sight, it had become his true home. Mattie had been wondering whether he, too, would go up and speak. He wanted to, for surely village had also become his true home and saved him, but he felt a little shy. Then he heard the blind man begin to speak on his behalf. My boy came here 6 years ago as a child. Many of you remember Mattie when he was then. He fought and swore and stole. Mattie liked the sound of the phrase, my boy, which he had never heard the blind man use before, but he was embarrassed to see people turn and look at him. Village changed him and made him what he is now, the blind man said. He will receive his true name soon. For a moment, Mattie hoped that Leader, who was still standing on the platform, would hold up his hand and call for silence. Would call Mattie, place his hand on Mattie's forehead, then announce his true name. It had happened that way sometimes. Messenger. Mattie held his breath, hoping for that. But instead he heard another's voice, not Leader's. I remember what he was like. If we close the border, we won't have to do that anymore. We won't have to deal with thieves and braggarts and people who have lice in their hair the way that Mattie did when he came. Mattie turned to look. It was a woman. He was stunned, as if someone had slapped him. It was his own neighbor, the very woman who had made clothes for him when he came. He remembered standing there in his rags while she measured him, and then put on her thimble to stitch the clothing for him. She had a soft voice then and talked gently to him while she sewed. Now she had a sewing machine, a very fancy one, and bolts of fabric with which she created fine clothing. Now the blind man stitched the simple things that he and Mattie needed. So she, too, had traded and was turning not only on him, but on all the new ones. Her voice incited others, and now large numbers of people were calling out, "Close village! Close the border!" Mattie had never seen Leader look so sad. Okay, so all these people, this nice woman who had hand-stitched all these clothes for Mattie when he first got there, now has this fancy sewing machine that she obviously traded for at market at one point, and now she was this nice woman, but after the trade she's become this mean lady not wanting to help anyone anymore. So we're at the bottom of 96. When it was over and the vote to close village had been finalized, Mattie trudged home beside the blind man. At first they were silent. There was nothing to be said. Their world had changed now. After a bit, Mattie tried to talk, to be cheerful, to make the best of things. I suppose he'll send me out now to all the other villages and community with the message. I'll be doing a lot of traveling. I'm glad it wasn't winter yet. It's hard in snow. He came in snow, the blind man said. He knows what it's like. Mattie wondered for a moment what he was talking about. Who? Oh, yes, he thought, the little sled. So they're talking about Jonas, who, is now Leader. Jonas was in The Giver, And now, as the leader, it's kind of a story for everyone about how he got there. Remember, at the end of The Giver, he got on the sled in the snow and ended up in this village? Well, that's where they are in this story. Leader knows better than anyone about things, Maddie remarked, and he's still younger than many. He sees beyond, Seer said. What? He has a special gift. Some people do. Leader sees beyond. Maddie was startled. He had noticed the quality of Leader's pale blue eyes, how they seemed to have kind of vision most people didn't have, but he had not heard it described that way before. It made him think of what he had only recently come to know about himself. Some people, like Leader, have a special gift? It's true, Seer replied. Is it always the same? Is it always, what did you say? Seeing beyond? They were nearing the curve in the path where it branched off and led to their home place. Maddie watched in awe, as he always did, how the blind man felt the coming curve and knew, even in his darkness, where to turn. No, it's different for different people. Do you have it? Is that how you know where to walk? The blind man laughed. No, I've learned that. I've been without eyes for many years. At first I stumbled and bumped into things, and people had to help me out all the time. Of course, in the old days of village, people were quick to help and guide. His voice became bitter. Who knows what will happen now? And they had arrived at the house, and he could hear Frolic scratching at the door and woofing in excitement at the sound of their approach. Maddie didn't want the conversation to end here. He wanted to tell the blind man about himself and about his secret. So you don't have a special gift? Like Leader, but other people do? My daughter does. She told me of it that night, the night you took me to her. Kira? Remember from Gathering Blue? Seer is Kira's dad. Kira? She has a special gift? Yes, your old friend Kira, the one who taught you manners. Maddie ignored that. She must be all grown up now. I saw her last time I was there, but it's been almost 2 years. But Seer, what do you mean? The blind man stopped unexpectedly on the steps leading to the door. Maddie, he said with sudden urgency. What? I've just realized the border will be closing in 3 weeks. Yes? Seer sat down on the steps. He put his head in his hands. Sometimes he did that when he was thinking. Maddie sat beside him and waited. He could hear Frolic inside, throwing himself against the door in frustration. Finally, the blind man spoke. I want you to go to your old village, Maddie. Leader will be sending you anyway with a message. He'll no doubt send you to several places, but Maddie, I want you to go to your old village first. Leader will understand. But I don't. This is page 100. My daughter, she said someday she would come here to live when the time was right. You know her, Maddie. You know she said she had things to accomplish there first. Yes, and she has, Seer. I could tell when I was there. Things have changed. People take good care of their children, and he hesitated, unable to speak for a moment because the memory of his own abuse had returned. Then he added simply, Kira made things change. Things are better now. There are only 3 weeks left, Maddie. After the border closes, it will be too late. She won't be allowed to come. You must bring her here before that happens. If you don't, Maddie, I'll never see her again. It always seems strange to me when you say see. The blind man smiled. I see in my heart, Maddie. Maddie nodded. I know you do. I'll bring her here to you. I'll leave here tomorrow. Together they rose. Evening was coming. Maddie opened the door and Frolic leaped into his arms. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 10. Actually went by much quicker than I thought. So they had the vote, and it's what we all didn't want. And they are going to close the village in 3 weeks. So that means that nobody else will be able to come in. So we'll have to find out what happens to that woman who is considering going back to get her younger children, Vladik's mom. And then now Seer is talking about, hey, we need to go get Kira. So I did not expect Kira to make a comeback in this book, but maybe she will. And so we will jump into chapter 11 next week. And I'm trying to think, I'm working on a schedule to follow up the calendar that's in your notebook. The notebook has, March and April in the front of the binder, and it charts out like when we're going to do different activities, but it only went until April 24th. So I'm going to get a schedule to you this week that will cover next week's activities, and I really hope that we can finish this definitely before the end of the school year, but hopefully sooner than that. So, all right, well, that was chapter 10, and we will do 11 next week, and listen to this 1 or 2 times, and then get ready for the quiz on Friday. All right, love y'all.